Greetings, explorers. Welcome to a very special exploration with Michelle Gibson, one who needs no introduction in this field of research. Michelle, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate the invitation.
Um, I'm actually honored to be speaking with you. Much of my research um, um, it is built upon your research, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for your service to humanity, and I mean it in the most sincerest way. I think it's very important work, and it's not easy work digging out the truth from beneath the lies. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you very much, Chris.
If you don't mind giving us a brief synopsis of your experience in this field of research, and then we can get into a conversation.
I can do that. So in terms of getting to where I am right now, where I'm sitting here talking to you on this subject, goes really back to the very beginning of my life, in the sense that I became aware of things, anomalies in the environment from a young age, and filed it away in my brain. And I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. in Rockville, Maryland, and not too far from the C&O Canal, and a lot of history there. And I'm working on something right now that I'm pulling some things out, starting there as a starting point. And it's like long before I consciously became aware of any of this, I was collecting puzzle pieces. And I really believe that this is a life mission for me, because there's absolutely no reason for me to know any of this. I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in a solidly middle class family, Southern Baptist background, parents, and there was nothing. There's still nothing. My parents are still alive, and this isn't even a blip on their
Sure.
radar. I mean, it's it's not there.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I was interested in mystery kind of programs when I was growing up. And there's certainly a lot more available now than there was in the 70s and the 80s. But things like Unsolved Mysteries and In Search Of, and programs like that, I just loved. And, again, I'm just kind of filing things away. It's still part of the false story,
Mm-hmm.
but at least there's some kind of introduction of things that can't be explained.
Yeah, yeah, just sort of seeping into our consciousness very slowly, very
Right.
at that time.
And I appreciate shows like Ancient Aliens, because at least it's getting those things out to the public, because if it was called Ancient Humans, it would not have made it past the first couple of episodes.
Yeah, the
So
cover.
they can talk about it if it's like somewhere out here and woo-woo and things like that, but it's
Yeah,
still getting something out to the public for
yeah,
consumption on, otherwise forbidden topics.
yeah,
And so, the internet's been an invaluable tool. Without it, we'd be sunk, I think.
yeah. I agree.
But but it's been invaluable. And so I'm saying that because there's pre-internet, post-internet, and what you could find before that was things like Chariots of the Gods and stuff like that. But more information's become available. I couldn't do most of the research I do without it. I have gone to places, I have taken pictures, but since I'm going all over the earth, there's places I've never even heard of.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, and I'll talk about that here in just a moment. So, bringing that forward, in so I started to see what's in the environment around me when I was living in Oklahoma City, and all of the earthworks and megalithic stones all over the place, just kind of along the sidewalk, and Starbucks and in front of Starbucks and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a Moorish American friend that introduced me to the Moors, and I didn't know anything about the Moors before that. And so the pieces are starting to kind of come even faster, because the Moors have been totally removed from history with the exception of 800 years in Spain.
Mm.
And their architecture and accomplishments, have been credited to everyone else and anyone else. Even people with no background in anything get credit, the architects and so forth. They're just like geniuses. No training.
Yeah. All too often I hear that story. All too often.
So they and the we'll call them the usurpers, infiltrated the Masonic lodges. And so there was Moorish Masonry, and then there's what we know as Western Freemasonry. And they don't have that knowledge. What they seem to be able to do is invert it, subvert it, use it for, let's just say, black magic, because that's what we're talking about.
Sure.
Sadly. And so they've subverted it, sacred geometry, all 9 yards, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And used it against us to bind us and control us and suck the life out of us and the wealth out of us and leave us with crumbs, and we think we're doing good. And that's how the system has been set up and rigged. And
Parasites.
So exactly. So so we think we're doing great, with our 9 to 5 and our little amenities and all our distractions and things like that. When the reality is pretty darn scary. And I don't really like to go into the darker parts, but the roads lead there when when you get deep into the rabbit hole and start putting the whole thing together. It's pretty bad.
What we really are to them, I suppose, is what you're
Right,
talking about.
exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
sure.
Right. An energy
We can
source.
leave it at that. Yeah, we can leave it. We don't have to go too deep into that on YouTube.
Right.
Yeah.
So so my original research started when I found a star tetrahedron by connecting cities in North America. And what that ended up giving me were data points. And so I wrote them down in spreadsheets, and I started looking at these places in alignment. And by that time, I had a background in sacred geometry from a Flower of Life course that I had taken in around 2007. And again, with the information that's coming in on the internet, conferences, megalithomania was a big influence when I first started. Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods, Robert Bauval, and the Orion, I think, mystery or theory or something with the belt stars of Orion and the pyramids of Giza.
I'd like to jump in. I'd say our experiences overlap very, very nicely. And as far as that research goes, I got deep into that stuff. Even Drumvallo's research, that's who you're referring to, right?
Drumvallo was where I learned about sacred geometry.
Yeah. So we're syncing,
and
definitely.
That was around 2007. And so I started getting this alternate stream in. And when I say it feels like a mission to me, it's like the things I'm interested in is this alternative research and history, and people and books and experiences started just to come my way. I mean, I didn't even have to go look for it. I had a friend, I was living in Fairbanks, Alaska at the time, and I had a friend who got the books from the president of the University of Alaska as he was retiring. And some of these books were in that collection. And I happened to be visiting and looking at the books that she got from him, and I'm like, oh, I'll take this one, and I'll take this one, and and I think, I think Bauval's book was in there, and there was some other Atlantis Rising kind of things in there, and I'm reading this stuff, this more.
Yeah.
And so, but it's not just the books; it's people and it's experiences, and and then I have the skill sets to put it all together. And I have to say, I've always been a good technical writer. And I liked to write poetry when I was a kid, but all of my writing outside of my education, I had nothing to write about. It's like, I'm not going to sit here and write about my life. I'm not going to do all this other stuff. But when this came into focus for me, it's like, I have so many topics and things to write about that I could go on forever and ever. And
you've
so
extensive body of work on your website, definitely. Yeah.
And it's like when I got all this information and it came together for me, it's like, okay, I have this responsibility to get this back out,
Mm-hmm.
because I really feel like I got the big picture. And as I've
Yeah.
been doing the research of following these places in alignment, that was the beginning of my research. I started to see everything looking the same all over the earth, and how the colonizers came in, where they went. They seemed to be following these ley lines, grid lines, capturing star forts at the
And
very
when are you
beginning.
piecing this together? When are you piecing all this together? What you're talking about now? About what year?
So when I started so I got the star tetrahedron in North America, extended the lines out. I wrote down the places. I was already seeing the megaliths in the environment and the earthworks, and starting to look differently at
Okay.
buildings. And you said
Yeah.
that you look a lot at the architecture. I started looking differently at buildings. I learned about the Moors, and so when I started doing the blogging, my early posts, which I soon converted into videos, so everything I write about is in video form also.
Yeah.
I I I talked about that, like the salt lakes and connecting dots, and how I came into this awareness, what are star forts. And then when I started following cities and places in alignment, I got even more information that I could see the same hand of design all over the earth. The
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure was the same. The snaky S-shaped rivers, the canals, um, the buildings, um, there's
Yeah.
just so many things to choose from. And
Yeah.
so I got to that point, and then when I started looking at those places, I started to get into all this data about the original civilization and how wonderful it was. And then I started to see who the colonizers were and when they were coming in, and going deep into that. So I've ended up doing a lot of timeline research,
Mm-hmm.
which we're going to be talking about. And it's just taking me deeper and deeper into this. And I really believe that it's a co-creative process with whatever is helping me along in this. And I do believe that I'm not doing this by myself.
No.
I'm open to the idea that I got help from the other side.
Sure.
this saying, oh, we got a live one.
Well,
Here.
your research has put a call out to those of us out there who seek truth as well. That's why I'm here talking to you now. So it's looking for cavalry. The cavalry's coming in now. I think you're starting to see this research swell. I think anyway, despite any sort of censorship that might be out there.
And what's really interesting about it is it's bubbling up from the grassroots, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
because the cavalry that you're talking about, there was cavalry in place before I started, and that the numbers are growing of people just looking at things and registering, hey, wait a minute, there's something really wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not big names.
You are. Come on, Michelle. You're a legend.
But I'm not.
You're a legend.
Really, I'm not.
No, I know what you're saying. Well, because the pop culture has been, we know what pop culture is. So,
so basically, unknowns, in the world of influencers, if you will,
mm-hmm.
and so I'm just doing what I'm motivated to do.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I have a responsibility to do it, and I do enjoy it.
Yeah.
And sometimes my head just swells and wants to burst with the things that I'm finding, and it doesn't always feel very good. But we have to keep breaking that down so that people do start asking questions. And that's the biggest thing I try to leave with people, is just start looking in your own community. It's there. It's all over the earth.
Yeah.
For the buildings that are still standing, and you're showing pictures of buildings that aren't. Is
Hmm.
that one in Atlantic City?
Yeah, that's the
That,
Marlboro Blenheim, I
that
believe.
that burned down, I believe, or was demolished or something.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not there
yeah.
anymore.
No, it's gone. Of
There's a
course.
lot of there was a lot of Moorish architecture and
Yeah.
there. Yeah. So anyway, I recognize that
Well,
one.
I'll explain like my experience with this research is like I got deep into it 2 years ago. After a couple decades of alternative research, this hit me from the left field like a ton of bricks. Like, how could I have missed this? Was my
Mhm.
reaction, and I was in a state of shock for several months trying to understand what I was looking at. Took me a while to really level off my feelings about it all and be able to articulate it. And then a year later, I began to share on YouTube. But this is takes a bit of digestion. This field of research for people, you know.
Um,
Yeah,
and same thing. And I think we're all in that boat of how did I miss this?
yeah,
Because I'll be 60 in July, and even though I've started to notice things when I was younger, like really
yeah.
young, I didn't see it until the let's say last 15 years. I didn't
And
see it.
maybe this gets into the whole veil thing that you talk about piercing the veil of illusion. The veil had to lift a certain amount for more eyes to actually see what this is deception's all about, because this deception's not that deep in time. We talked
No,
about
it's
this
not.
before we
It's
and
not.
we'll get into that. And it's a part of the field of research a lot of people have trouble with is um, digging into a period of time where people that are alive may still be able to remember, um, but the deception goes on down through right to modern day, to be honest. Yeah.
Right. And not only that, but even with people that are awake and aware to this, the dissonance involved with our history having been fabricated,
Uh-huh.
anything in the historical narrative, as far as I'm concerned, at least before a certain point in time, is BS.
Uh-huh.
It's filler. And
Well,
maybe some of the historical characters lived and maybe they didn't, but it's been um, fabricated. And
I think
so I'm just going to finish the thought that
yeah.
so what I think is that at some point, and I don't know what year, the history that we're taught is history with them written into it, the
Uh,
controllers.
yeah.
But before that point in time, it's not. And I'm saying I'm thinking somewhere in the 1700s, maybe 1800s. It would be around that time.
Uh,
But like we were talking about before you started to record, there are photos in existence of mud flood in the early 1900s in places like Pittsburgh.
yeah.
And so it just really, we can do a good job of at least presenting what's available to find and our ideas about it. But there's a whole black hole in there of, okay, what happened?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I know so much is up to this day of what we're told is just completely false, like false flags and all the things that have been done to get us into the state of constant fear,
Yeah.
so that we're more easy to control.
Well,
Um,
yeah.
I know that, but I'm not up to speed on a lot of stuff. So I'll look at the narrative. I'll look at what the narrative says. I'm not an expert in what's been hidden from us in terms of, okay, this was, this person really didn't exist, or, this person is the same as that person, or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And people will leave comments that that's not true, or, anyway, but I'm going with what's available to find,
Yeah.
which is what they tell us. And then I try to read between the lines or show patterns of things that are happening. And that's what I'm able to do, is show the patterns. And but I'm like everybody else. If I go to look something up, I'm going to find what the official story is.
Yeah, we can't say one way or the other as far as what happened in a period of time or a place that we weren't there. So a lot of people come to defend the historical narrative because you're offending their sensibilities with the suggestion that maybe there's a deception. I've countered that a
or
lot.
or the other way.
Or the
It
other way,
goes both ways.
for sure. Yeah.
Either it's offensive to the sensibilities, that it's too hard to believe that that couldn't be true,
Uh-huh.
or the people that are already red pilled or black pilled or whatever you want to call it, that say, well, you're, you know, that's not true either.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah. It's good. I hear what you said. Black pilled is a good term. I deal with a
so
lot of the black pilled.
so I'm just trying to put together, okay, this is what happened, but again, I'm looking for patterns, and that's at least as far as the narrative research and the timeline research. Um,
I wanted to mention because you talked about how the way that our history has been recorded, and we use a lot of newspaper articles to record history. Um, what the events of the last 3 years has really blown that wide open. How much we are being lied to.
right.
I think that's why we're in such a trigger moment, because it's now been made obvious to us how badly we've been deceived, or how, and then we can now trace that back down through history and say, I don't trust it. I don't trust it. That's
Right.
yeah.
And they're not even hiding it.
No.
They're in accelerated mode. They've got to bring in their plans that they worked so long and so hard for, but they could only really succeed if it was in darkness, and it's all being exposed.
Yeah.
And then the gaslighting and the lies that
Yeah.
they tell, and the inaction, with a lot of
Yeah.
the things that have happened this year,
Yeah.
with all the explosions and all that kind of stuff. So they just double down even more on the lies. And
I saw a good quote too that said, the harder they push for their, the harder the darkness pushes now, the quicker the veil will lift. So it feels like we're in some sort of weird stasis. Like they know this. They hesitate to push because the boomerang reaction comes quicker and harder now. If
right.
that makes any sense.
And I can tell you that if they were still in control, we would still be in the mode that we were in 3 years ago.
Absolutely, agreed. Yeah.
So that's
So we're
as
not black pill.
even though I want to see more action, I also know that it would be a far different situation. And
Yeah.
we're seeing a part of what was planned playing out, but
Yeah. I
but
agree with you. I think we resonate quite a bit with our perspective. So, um, do you want to maybe go through a little chronology? We talked a little bit about like I have a few websites open here. I wanted to chart back from the 50s down to about 1900, because much of what I'm showing here comes from about that time period, 1900. Much of what I show on my channel are visuals from, let's say, 1880 to 1910, 1920. Um,
okay.
so I
So why
wanted,
don't
go ahead.
go ahead and start with yours, and then I'll talk about the timelines
Sure.
scenarios that I put together.
Okay. So like I said, so my channel mostly has to do with architecture. Um, and we have what's called the most of the architecture coming out of the 1800 to about 1950, much of it destroyed over that time period. But we have the birth of what's called brutalism in the 50s, brutalist architecture. So, and that's the cityscapes that you see these days with the cubes and very basic. There's no decoration, no architecture. Um, so I think that was really when they began building, rebuilding um, the world in their image, I suppose, which is a pretty ugly image. So I wanted to chart backwards from that time period and illustrate possibly the way that they have engineered our timeline from about 1958 and moving backwards. And I was going to start with um, the founding of NASA in 1958, which I think is helping to implant a perception of our reality. Let's leave it at that, I suppose. And you have this incident as well during that same timeline or same year, um, which I think is interesting and blends nicely with what's gone on over the last couple of years. And then I do have a bit of a timeline before I get to a couple of the websites that I have saved for us to go through. Atomic bomb testing in the 50s is worth a mention. Implementation of fear in the school system, fear that it could all end at the flip of a switch, I think is a major part of the trauma that they needed to inflict on us for this to work. We can go back to post World War II, United Nations, and of course I didn't mention the TV. I wanted to bring up the implementation of the television. I hope I'm not jumping around too much here. I have a lot of information I wanted to get to with you. Let's talk a little bit about the television, if you don't mind. What do I have here? Oh, no, that's not it. I thought I had it saved. It's we'll get to it here. Are you familiar with John Logie Baird? That name?
Name's not familiar.
Okay. Let me just open up a link. So this apparently is the, I don't know, the godfather of television. I don't know why it's not loading for me right now, but it's just an interesting little blurb I wanted to bring up because television really taking hold in the 50s, late 40s, 50s. Like right now, we're kind of focusing on North America, right? But I don't know why this isn't loading. I'll just say a few things that I noticed about this gentleman. He was into the channeling of spirits, and that's sort of how the invention of the TV came about, which I thought was interesting because post World War II, they really sit us down in front of the TV, and the programming goes into overdrive. So I felt that important to mention. And I do bring it up quite a bit in my videos as well. And I wish I had that on here. So spirit channeling television, there's a link there. What else? And then, of course, World War II, which I think is a major traumatic trigger event. I call it the hammer. That's when they really put the hammer down on Western society. And there's an old saying with World War II, you don't talk about the war. Anyone who kind of came up through the 40s and 50s, that was sort of common knowledge. You just don't talk about the war. That's one way to erase history. So I think that's important. And of course, Hollywood in conjunction with the wartime propaganda, the setting of the narrative for our time, right? Let's see here. I have the Dust Bowl on my list as well. The Great Depression and the Dust Bowl in the States. What do you know about that period of time, if you don't mind sharing a little bit on that?
Well, what's interesting is that in terms of architecture, a lot of the monumental architecture at least in the States and probably I know it's in other places too, was attributed to Depression era building programs. We're talking Greco-Roman style on steroids, the Supreme Court building.
Is that the Civil Works program? There's a few names and acronyms for that, right?
Right. Public Works Administration, the CCC and the WPA tended to be smaller projects, like at parks and getting the areas to where people could come and visit with trails and picnic areas and things like that. But what I found is that these sites are old sites, they're ancient sites, and so confusing the public about who actually built them. Mm-hmm. This place was built by the CCC in the 1930s, but there's still stonework and impossible structures for unskilled laborers, things like that. And that was early in my waking up to this. I was going to a couple of those places and saying,
yeah,
and looking and taking pictures and seeing the facilities, and then also seeing beautiful stonework along canals and waterfalls and things like that. So
and old, right? Old looking.
Very old looking.
Not less than 100 years old.
Yeah, it was, yeah. A cover story for sure.
Yeah.
But there were larger projects during the Depression, buildings, beautiful, incredible buildings that were said to have been built by these programs. And it's like, yeah, right. No way.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few in my research as well. I include them in a lot of my videos. And yeah, a lot of them have that Art Deco look. Maybe they have a lot of statue and ornate and amazing interiors still.
Right. And they have a whole bag of names that they call those styles, like you mentioned, Art
Yeah,
Deco, and
yeah,
I've seen all kinds.
yeah,
And streamline modern is one.
yeah.
And the other aspect, since you mentioned the Dust Bowl, is books like The Grapes of Wrath by John
Mm,
Steinbeck about the Dust Bowl, which is what most people think about it.
mm.
And these writers, Steinbeck and especially Jack London, are influencers in the narrative. Mark
Oh,
Twain,
initiated.
they're programming devices. All the stuff that we learn about required reading in school that get turned into movies. So you read this crap, if you will, when you're made to read it because it's compulsory education.
Yeah.
In the States, it was set up by the Rockefellers. They were involved in it from the get-go
Uh-huh.
in the 1850s.
Yeah.
And and so they're feeding us this crap. And then I mean it's hard because the whole system is based on lies. Everything is based on lies.
Yeah.
So so we're taught this like it's gospel truth. And so to really get to the truth, you just have to step back from everything you've ever learned. And
Yeah.
for whatever reason, it was easy for me to do that, but it's not easy for most people.
They're expecting us to have trust and faith in their deception, right? That's what it appears to me. And once you once you stop giving them that trust and faith, then you can really get into picking it apart, at least. You know.
I didn't get the memo about don't think critically, and that was deliberately removed from the curriculum around that same 1850 time period.
Yeah.
So they took critical thinking right on out because they just wanted people educated enough to be able to work
Yeah. And
obediently.
there seems to be enough research out there where it should be common knowledge that these robber baron type figures, and you mentioned the Rockefellers, it should be obvious, Carnegie and all that crap. It just seems like it should be common knowledge, but it doesn't enter the pop culture. So anyone who puts all their faith in the pop culture refuses to accept it and see it. But it really is obvious with just a little bit of peeking behind the veil, I think.
Yeah. And you mentioned with the television programming starting in earnest after World War II, you have that whole older generation that's been raised on all of this stuff.
That's right.
My parents are in their 80s, you just believe what you're told on the TV. And you read the paper every morning or evening or whatever. You read the paper every day. I was
Yeah.
never interested in the newspaper. I didn't get that memo either.
I'll and that ties right back into what I just said. Where does that lead you? Well, we've seen where that leads you in the last several years. So again, we need to take our trust away from these institutions, and we will look at some of the founding of those anchors, I would say, of conventional mainstream thought in these. We're going to go backwards from 1929 to 1901, I believe, and then I want you to chime in with whatever you got on any of these incidences, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So starting in 1929, I'll just read out some of it. Interesting. So the last year of the 20s, Richard Byrd flies over the South Pole. You see a lot of this going on. North Pole, South Pole exploration during this time period. I believe a setting of the narrative um, from my perspective. Um, the car radio was invented 1929. Well, that helps get the propaganda out there. Academy Awards made their debut. And then we have a few other things of St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and then of course the stock market crash, which triggers the Great Depression. Of course, I'm not saying we can trust any of these as having happened as they did either, to be honest with you, but this is how our chronology is given to us down through time. So I think it's interesting, and you'll see as we move backwards here, Really the setting of the narrative. 1928, we have sliced bread and bubble gum. The first Mickey Mouse cartoon. Well, what do you know?
Hmm.
And there's penicillin.
Right. And like we were talking about, it's like they just dress it up in benevolence, Mickey Mouse and the whole
Yeah.
Disney, phenomena is
Which it's
geared
been exposed.
towards.
It's out in the open. They're done. As far as I'm concerned, Disney is in trouble. There's too many people that can see.
Yeah,
That's what
well,
I think.
like I said, they're not hiding it anymore. So
No, you have to. You
they're
have
no
to.
longer
Well,
hiding it that they're
we're in
doing.
an age where you have to willingly accept what they're putting out, and it's been made obvious what they are. So if you can't turn
I
away
won't.
from that,
I won't go into detail, but I think it was either this morning or yesterday. There was something about a shop at Disneyland that had a person in a dress with a mustache.
I saw it too. You
So
have to accept it. You have to be okay with it all. Yeah.
ain't gonna work.
No. Exactly. I think it's like I said, the harder they push, the quicker the veil lifts. So let's lift this veil already. 27, 1927. You have the Babe Ruth narrative, and I like your work on the energy grid and sports and how that's been set up for us as and hopefully correct me if I'm wrong. It's like as a way to channel our energy, to harvest our energy.
Right. And so I did quite a bit of work on circuit board Earth and really looking at terms and the patterns that I was seeing with airports and some kind of track, like in an angular relationship a short
Yes.
distance away all over the Earth.
Uh-huh.
And sports stadiums being close to like rivers in the same configuration in different places. And then with the research that I had already done on hot springs and trolley parks and these things that don't exist anymore, trolley car systems, how they were taken out, and those are other impossible stories. Like they did all this work to build this streetcar, and then 7 years later they stopped running.
Yeah.
It gets pretty obvious. And I'm going deeper into things like that. But Chad Williams of Deeper Conversations with Chad, I highly recommend his work.
Okay.
He took the whole circuit board Earth concept to another level with the stadiums and how it kind of forms our energy. We're being used like batteries,
Yeah.
essentially. And this
Is it?
energy is being harvested, and we're doing some more work on stuff like that. So that's kind of a collaborative effort of just pinging off each other, and another gentleman who's like a grid specialist,
Yeah.
Adam Sokolka.
Okay.
And so anyway, we're kind of working together and really on some aspects of it in the energy harvesting, and then doing our own, work that we're guided to do. So, it's like, and talking about it, we're bubbling up from the grassroots. There's a lot of synchronistic kinds of things going on.
Mhm.
And I just really think the information just wants to come back out.
Is Chad the one who has analyzed the layout of the players in a lot of these sports, and then as a
I,
diagram? Is that?
I believe so. Yeah, he's done quite a bit of work with
I've
that.
seen
And that
some of his
was
work. Very
what
interesting stuff.
he was, how he has been guided, and
Yeah,
his
sure.
insights and intuition.
Resonates for
Um,
sure.
so, it just seems like, anyway, it's an exciting time,
Absolutely,
because
absolutely. Yeah.
it's really coming out faster than I can even keep my head wrapped around.
Yeah, no, it's good though. We need it. We need it. We need it to move. We need it to move.
Yeah.
We also have the BBC founding in 1927. BBC. We love the BBC, don't we? Okay. 1926. I'll try to pull. Henry Ford announced the 40-hour work week, 1926. How do you like them apples?
Hey, we're doing good. We went from every day, all day to 40 hours and a
Yeah,
weekend.
we should be grateful to Henry Ford for announcing the 40-hour work week. I should actually throw this in there too. Here's the Ford logo with your what looks to be a couple of, I don't know, sixes maybe, possibly. Maybe I'm seeing things. All right. What else? Richard Byrd again, Admiral Byrd. North Pole this time, South Pole, North Pole. So establishing, um, yeah, the shape. We won't get too much into that. I have an idea of where you stand on the shape of
Well,
where we exist.
well, I didn't have an opinion, but I've found enough evidence for the tampering of our perception of space and time that
Sure.
even though I don't really focus on flat Earth, either we're on a spinning ball or everything is moving around us, and I'm leaning towards everything's spinning around us.
Yeah, it seems to be, and there's a third option there, isn't there? A toroidal shape that a lot of people.
And I'm actually comfortable with that.
Yeah.
But what we've been told is no.
Let's just say what we've been told is hogwash, and we can explore other options. We're into exploring other options.
Right.
Okay, Houdini dies. Let's see what else here. Oh, this is a good one. First liquid-fueled rocket gets fired off, 26. Route 66 is established in the States, which I thought was interesting, 1926. And then you have your Winnie the Pooh for generations of children to adore. All right, 1925. They get into the dress of the time, and then Hitler. It's funny how he just seems to be, all down through the decades previous to World War II. He pops up in a lot of these, a lot of this type of research.
And what's also interesting is that in between World War I and World War II, in Weimar Germany, they were doing the exact same kind of social experimentation that we're seeing.
No.
Now they were. It
Yeah.
was the exact same, and the people of Berlin, for example, they were poor. The economy was tanked. They only had a few options, and so they were a lot of prostituting, and these bars and speakeasies would offer free booze, and and then they got into the whole Victor Victoria kind of thing.
Yeah.
As a cultural event during that time. So it seems like what I'm seeing in my history research are practice runs.
Yeah. Sure.
Lots and lots of practice runs.
Yeah.
So before the partition of India in 1947, after the end of World War II, where they send the Hindus in one direction and the Muslims in the other direction,
Uh-huh.
and just rip them up. They did the same thing in around 1905 in what was Bengal, but in Bangladesh.
Uh-huh.
They did it on a smaller scale.
Mm.
And so it just seems like, okay, before they do this, they're going to test run it.
Sure. Of course. Yeah. On the smaller scale, and then before you release it on a larger scale. Sure.
Yeah. And the whole thing with the name that we're not going to mention, you mentioned the whole polio thing.
Uh-huh.
And, just kind of getting us used to that whole concept.
Of course. Yeah. Science.
And just, increasing numbers and schedules, and by a certain age you have so many that are required.
Yeah.
So they're introducing us to these ideas slowly.
And it requires a blind faith, and that's exactly what's in question right now. Is, hold on a sec, we had all our faith in this, and we're starting to realize maybe we shouldn't have.
Should be. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Great Gatsby also comes out in 1925, and that's interesting too, because I may have read it, I may have seen a movie, but it doesn't have to do with sort of forget your worries and party extravagance. Am I That's kind of what the Great Gatsby's about, right?
Probably. I mean, they were, setting the narrative.
Yeah, yeah. I found it interesting because this website really lays out the setting of the narrative, so that's why I wanted to share it. That's interesting. First Olympic Winter Games, 1924. There's an energy harvesting going on there every couple of years. You can really feel the buildup to any of these Olympic Games, I think.
And there's some bizarre statues outside of, I believe it was the Olympic Stadium in Los Angeles. There's 2 bodies, one male, one female, with no head.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So they're like these, muscular specimens with no head.
Cool. Yeah. Wow.
And there's there's a lot of really disturbing public art,
Yes.
that gets stuck out there. People walk around it. They're interacting with it, but they don't protest.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's, somebody just put that ugly piece of art there.
Yeah.
And, again, that's another part of the programming, and I think gaining of our consent for this anti-human agenda.
Yeah, I see it
Is,
a lot.
well, they don't
Showed you.
complain.
Showed you, and you were fine with it. Yeah, that's why we have to complain. It's very important for us to speak out against it. I think it to protest and say we know we're not okay with this. And that's what we do with our research as well. I think, and it's happening on a large scale. I think in our society.
And sometimes I definitely have an opinion that I'm trying to get across.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of times I just want to put the information out there so people can see it and come to their own conclusions.
Of course. And you do a great job of that, by the way.
Thank you. So I do it both, but I really want people to think about it.
Sure. I think it's important. Definitely. Here we have Time Magazine, founded 1923. One of the anchors of modern thought, I suppose. What do you have? Newsweek, Time, The Economist. All of those have shaped the thinking man and woman's perception for quite some time, I think.
And I like your choice of the word anchor, because that's what we call newscasters, right? Anchors.
Yeah, right. That's true. Yeah, we can anchor your beliefs with those individuals, right?
Just trust us.
Just trust. Yeah. I like this one. This one kind of struck a nerve with me as I was looking at yesterday. The tomb of King Tut, discovered by this gentleman. I'm not sure if his name's in there. It feels fake to me. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. I came across it yesterday. Feels like setting of a narrative and a timeline. That's what it feels like to me. Could be wrong. We have also in 22, Mussolini marches on Rome, 30,000 men. Fascists come to power in Italy. So we really have turmoil going on everywhere. You don't have like a settled people in many of these regions, an upheaval.
Bottom line, question everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. What else do we have here? We have the air travel narrative being cemented in our reality here in 1921. Interesting. I'll keep going. Women win the right to vote, 1920. The first commercial radio broadcast airs. A League of Nations is established. Amazing. And the Harlem Renaissance began. I don't know exactly what that is, but so this is interesting. Like the setting of the narrative, really, really visible in this timeline, I think. Prohibition as well. Let's not forget. I'm sure you have something to say about that. Rockefeller backed.
Well, what I would have to say about that, Chris, is the whole role of alcohol that's been foisted on us to lower our consciousness and, kind of put us out to where we don't care, and making it a part of our culture, so that, hey, it's fun to go to a restaurant with friends and have a few beers and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But the point that I want to make is this like controlled opposition. And so let's talk a little bit about timelines here in the 1800s. It was really around 1830 that the reset really kicked into high gear.
Okay.
And I look at 1850 as like the official beginning of it. 1851 with the Crystal Palace exhibition in London,
Mhm.
as like, we're ready. This is what we did, and we built this beautiful structure,
Roll out the red
and
carpet.
literally
Yep.
opened by
Yep.
Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
big goings on.
Yeah.
And 1830, you start to see Scotch whiskey with teachers in Scotland,
Ah.
and they had dram shops where you could just go in and drink whiskey, and other beer and spirits distilleries really kicking up into high gear starting around 1830. And all these cities that I've looked at, New Orleans and Cincinnati and St. Louis and all these places, early in their history had all of these distilleries and breweries.
Mhm. Mhm.
So they want to get us snookered.
Of course.
And then you get into the whole orphan thing, which is a whole nother issue about why were all these orphans? Where
Yeah.
did they come from? But
Yeah.
if there were adults around, they were probably drunk. And then it was like the fault of the parents for their weakness in drinking.
Uh-huh.
And then you get into the whole temperance movement, and which looks like it was based on masonry, because you see the steps of Freemasonry you see with temperance,
Yeah.
the drunkard's journey. So you're making all of this alcohol available.
Mhm.
People are drinking it. It's their fault, their vice. And then in the 1920s, during Prohibition, oh, we're going to take it away from you.
Ah.
But it's definitely part of how our collective consciousness was lowered, that was deliberately imposed on
Mhm.
us.
Mhm.
And yeah, you got some great pictures there.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, it's also the prohibition acts as a way, like I have a saying that rings in my head sometimes: deprivation breeds an obsession. So what they actually
Mhm.
did through prohibition appears to be they put it underground. They blew up the organized crime element of it, I suppose, and made it, desirably in a hidden way, I guess. So.
And I guess the other thing they did was, of course, there's tunnel systems everywhere,
Mhm.
but in places they said, well, the tunnels were constructed during Prohibition so the gangsters could have some place to go.
I've also heard that the tunnels were constructed for keeping the beer cool. That's been used a lot as well. So you gotta love it. Yeah.
They've certainly put a lot of effort into it, no doubt about that.
So there's some breweries. I did do a video on breweries, and it's I just like to compile the images and throw them out there for everyone to see, and just as like a catalog, really. And it is a really interesting part of our reality, and right up into the modern day, it's a if you refuse a drink in a social setting, it's many people are insulted by that, actually, which is I find interesting.
And there's a whole nother aspect to it when you look at how they've gotten so wealthy, and that we're
Mm,
paying for it.
mm,
We're
mm.
paying for our poisons, no matter
Yes,
what it is. And we're paying for our mind control every time we go to the movies.
that's right. That's true. Right. You will
You
love it.
know, and there's
That
something around organized sports. There's, stuff going on with that.
sure. Yeah.
The balls for the different sports are connected to sacred geometry and sacred imagery.
Yeah.
So it's like, they completely rigged the system.
Yeah.
There's no way they're going to get away with this, but
And,
they've been robbing us blind forever.
and it's a ruse because it's
Like,
not only have they imposed it upon us, they've made us beg for it
right.
in a way, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, down into the 19 teens, we have this gentleman again popping up with his Workers' Party. And then the Treaty of Versailles as a result of World War One, I believe. So alliances being made that globalism, right, which we're facing the culmination of in the modern day right now, and you could see the stepping stones being laid here as we go down backwards through time. It seems. We have the Russian Tsar being killed, and the family, of course, and then of course the Russian Revolution. So the sectioning off of the realm, the beginning of the Cold War, or the early stages of what will become the Cold War after World War II. But so I see this as a way for them to isolate us and then do their work behind closed doors. You know what I mean? So we didn't really have contact with this part of the world, or China, the Chinese Communist Revolution, same thing, right?
And what I was saying before about practice, bringing in communism to those places and what that really meant, with their long-term agenda of bringing it in everywhere, and how, people were forced onto farms and millions died from famine because the system just didn't work.
Yeah.
And so, the horrible reality of what has been planned for humanity was on full display.
Yeah.
And, and again, you get into Freemasonry, and Marx, I believe, was a Freemason. All these people were
Western
Freemasons.
educated. They're all Western educated.
And so, for me, Zionism is not just the whole, Israel thing. I think it's a collective name for these individual beings, whatever they are.
Sure.
That there are different categories of people that fall in, different parts of the world, and not all one religion, but that have this global domination plan, an agenda that they want to implement, with the end result of us being completely, the ones that survive, being completely controlled or controllable, and basically stealing our DNA and our soul.
Yeah, the transhumanist agenda, right? And,
right. That's the end game for them.
But like we said, we would totally renounce it, and the harder they push, the more it falls through their fingers. That's how I see it.
You will have nothing. You will be happy, and you'll eat bugs.
Yeah. So you can see here that would be the erasing of a culture, right? This is what they did. They erased this is where some of my roots come from. This old Russia, and my mother's grandfather came over from Russia in 1918 to Chicago, I believe it was. Fled the revolution there. So I'm closely tied with that scourge on humanity, and I recognize it for what it is in the modern day here, and I completely renounce it. Yeah, we don't need it, and what it seeks to do is erase culture, erase who and what we are.
Yeah, erase us.
Absolutely.
Erase the humanity as we know it.
Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Okay, let's keep going back. Let's see here. There's a few other interesting tidbits that come up at this period of time. So this is the beginning of the Russian Revolution here in 1917. Congress in the States declares war on Germany. That has to do with the sinking of the Lusitania, I believe. Am I correct? And that's what got the States into World War One, we're told.
Something like that.
Now, the steamships, it was a steamship, wasn't it, Lusitania? I find that whole aspect of the old world narrative interesting. The steam technology, the trains, of course, but I find very interesting the steamships that were basically being bombed into oblivion in World War One.
Yeah,
World War One really used as a technology eraser, I think.
I think all the wars that we are taught, at
Absolutely.
least in the modern era, were all part of doing that. The cover stories, especially the Civil War in America, especially there, but World War One, World War II, all of it. And I'm doing a lot of work on rail right now. I think steamships, and maybe even ocean liners, old world technology.
Well,
I mean, I
some of
look
the
at the
interior, the finish on some of those is incredible.
yeah,
The interior finish, and that's a dead giveaway. Go ahead. Sorry.
and that goes back to the whole burning question: when did this happen?
Mm, yeah.
Because those big ocean liners. I mean, do we even have the technology to build those? And maybe
Yeah.
someone in the audience will have the answer to that question. But
Mm,
so if we keep it to the idea of the steamships being old world technology, I would say absolutely 100%.
hmm hmm Well, I'd say certainly we do not finish them in such a manner. We don't finish anything like the fancy railings and the intricate the way that they're finished. We don't do that. It's not economical for one, but I just don't. Yeah. So there's definitely something that we've lost, and that goes for the interior of the old rail cars as well. Remember the Pullman
Mhm,
rail cars are spectacular. Um, I just also wanted to bring up the Ironsides from World War or from
mhm.
Civil War. That one really intrigues me as well. There's something weird about that.
Yeah. I mean, the Civil War is just a total cover story for not only the destruction of old world infrastructure, but also to explain the existence of like star forts and other
hmm
things that were said to have been built during that time.
And would you say that there's quite a strong emotional attachment to the Civil War in the States with people in general, or?
Possibly in general, for sure. I mean, it's a big, huge push kind of thing,
Mm,
and identify if you're from the north or from the south. Um, but I've done quite a bit of work on that, and I'm going to continue to do it to show that it's just BS story.
Yeah, because I have visions of the reenactments. You see them on the History
Mhm.
Channel, and people get my great grandfather fought here, and then they're really attached to it. So much so that they're reenacting these
Right,
battles, and
right,
it's a strange phenomenon actually. I
right,
find.
and it's how this story gets continually imprinted. You know,
hmm
yet even dare question. But it's a good example. Every museum, um, everything serves to reinforce this. The whole World's Fair was like an exposition, which is setting the narrative.
uh
Um, there's a ship moored on the Hudson River that's supposed to be a replica of the Half Moon of Henry Hudson.
Okay,
You know,
interesting.
but I don't even, I look at the explorers and maybe they explored in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, and then some German biographer wrote about them in the 19th century.
hmm
And that's the story we have about them. So I look at all of those characters really skeptically that they even existed. But that's the story that's going to be promoted. So they're going to put this replica of this ship,
Yeah, yeah.
slap the half moon on it, and call it good. And again, who built those ships? And I don't think it was what the narrative tells us.
No, it doesn't make sense.
The
And
tall
at the same
ships.
time, everything was being built. There's just that it's too obvious once you look into it. There's just no time and no resources, and no people, not enough people to make all this stuff just happen out of thin air in such a short period of time. So that's the obvious aspect to the deception, I think.
And then you go back and look at historical pictures of gigantic buildings like in Paris and other places with nobody there.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
streets are emptied except for a few small people compared to the size of the grand buildings that are in the picture.
that's right. Yeah, so it's and again, something that really has only entered our collective consciousness in the last couple of years. Really, like not
Mhm.
much more than a decade, but not even for most of us. You're at least a decade in, I guess, but a lot of people are
You know,
just touching this now.
and that goes back to the importance of the internet.
hmm hmm Absolutely, you can't keep a lid on it. They can censor, but they can't keep up with the censorship.
Mhm.
Mm. A couple more little details from here I think are interesting from 1916. John D. Rockefeller became the first American billionaire. Congratulations, good sir. Thanks for handing out your dimes. Uh, let's see here. We have, okay, this is one I wanted to bring up because this sort of syncs up with the old world cover up. We have the anti art movement popping up in 1916, known as Dada. I'd never heard of this until
Mhm.
yesterday.
Wow.
Have you heard of that at all?
Yep. 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 Yep.
Okay. If you will, can you shed any light on that?
Whew.
I've never heard of it, but it's like, to me, it screams, yeah, let's get rid of
Well,
the old beauty and make this beauty now.
so artists like Salvador Dali came out of that movement. Okay. You know how crazy things are right now?
Yeah. Yes.
You can find the beginnings of this because they're exploring art forms that aren't rational.
Okay.
And they're saying it's tapping into the subconscious, which is actually superior to the rational mind.
Huh.
And I think it's called the Surrealist Manifesto. Andre Breton.
Okay.
If you want to look up
Andre
his
Breton.
name, I think it's Andre Breton.
Let me do a search here.
And it was another way of breaking down our sensitivities to right and wrong and kind of anything goes. I mean, Dali was known for waxing his mustache up and, flies catching on the wax of the mustache.
Fantastic. There's Breton.
And
Surrealist.
just doing crazy things, but that this was somehow the breakdown of the rational mind was a good thing.
Which is
Well,
what
we
they
know
had
it's
planned.
not a good thing. We know it's not a good thing. Especially
no,
now.
You're easily controlled. When your rational mind is broken, you're easily controlled. Here's
yes,
Surrealist Manifesto.
men can have periods and get pregnant, right?
Yeah. So this is,
with a straight
exactly.
face.
Long planned, right? This is a long game.
Mm-hmm.
Here. For Surrealist Manifestos. Yeah. Breton. So interesting, the timeline that this is happening, mid 19 teens. So if you put it in perspective of the erasing of the old world and the beauty of the old world and the transplanting of what we consider to be art, you
And
can see this.
replacing it with absolute crap.
Sure, to fracture our consciousness.
Our consciousness, right? Exactly.
Yeah. Psychic automatism is in its pure state by which one proposes to express verbally, by means of the written word or in any other manner, the actual functioning of thought, dictated by thought in the absence of any control exercised by reason, exempt from any aesthetic or moral concern. That sounds like a do what thou wilt. Sounds a bit like a Crowleyan.
Right.
So,
and he's a big part of this.
Yes, of course. And he really came up in the 60s with a lot of pop culture there too, right? Which I find interesting.
I've got an interview with Chad and Adam that is going to be up on Chad's channel soon, and we're going to talk about things like that. Crowley comes up big time.
Let's maybe we'll just share that channel too, Chad's channel. I'll just put it in here.
Deeper conversations with Chad, and he's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, let's get the viewers to have a look at this. Oh, I'm subbed, of course. Yeah, I have seen his work.
He's really good.
Okay.
And I've done some interviews with him recently, and I said there's another big one that's coming up that's being edited right now.
Cool.
So the energy, it's like the second part of the energy harvesting one right there with the crane and the tree.
Yeah, sure.
That one.
Okay, I'll put it on my list too.
It's like a part 2.
Cool.
And really diving deep down that rabbit hole.
Was there another channel? We mentioned somebody else as well.
Well, Adam, it's Alchemy Spectrum.
I'll just throw it up just so people can have a look. I love sharing. I think I throw your stuff out all the time. Every second video I'm mentioning Michelle Gibson. So
yeah, Alchemy Spectrum is very good. His work, he's people are bringing. Yes, they're on the top. Yeah, people are really bringing in a lot of really different gifts, and special abilities.
Of course.
And another one is Stephanie McPeak Peterson. Stephanie McPeak Peterson, and her work is amazing. These are people I work with closely.
Excellent. Happy to share. Happy to share. Let's just show so people can see it. I'll put their links also in the description. And let's this is a community of like-minded people. I think that we all need to share our ideas, and everyone's got a different perspective. So check them out. Yeah. Okay, so that was the Dada we were getting into. So that's the destroying of art, really, I think. Also, Margaret Sanger sets up her first birth control clinic.
Oh, jeez.
Would you look at that,
And what's really interesting about that is that inventoriums ended around the same time that was coming into existence.
Well, what do you know? It's pretty easy to connect the dots when the dots are so close together.
Right.
If you ask me.
Exactly.
And that happened in Brooklyn. They're saying she was promptly arrested for it. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. We won't get too far into Sanger, but we know what she is.
Well, I mean, there's definitely an anti-human agenda at work here. And,
of course.
You know, any degree of red pilling, the further you get into it, it leads down some pretty dark trails. But you know, again, I think for us to heal collectively and move past this, it's not for everybody, but we can't just sweep it under the rug and
ignore it. No, we're seeing a lot of that too right now, by the way. Sorry.
So with like the orphan trains, which started around 1854, as far as I'm concerned, that was just large-scale child trafficking.
Of course, yeah. So what we're here to do is to shine light on that darkness, because more light that shine, the more the darkness diminishes. So that's why we share what we do and what we know. Right. So there's definitely a relationship there. All right, so we get on all this. Here we have the Lusitania, the sinking of Lusitania, 1915. We are at the Romanov situation happening in Russia. Let's see. Oh, The Birth of a Nation. Okay, this is interesting. D.W. Griffith's controversial film, The Birth of a Nation, portrays African Americans in negative light and glorifies the Ku Klux Klan. Definitely an agenda being set there at play right now, or attempting to put that at play right now, I think.
And so that's also around the origins of the film industry,
which we're getting to
started
as well.
Started in New Jersey and moved to California, and the all that represents in terms of narrative setting and all of that kind of thing. And I just want to make a connection between the early Westerns and what you were talking about with Henry Ford. Thomas Ince developed like an assembly line technique of production for these early Western films in the same manner that Henry Ford was mass producing automobiles, which were needed to replace the streetcars.
Of course, yeah.
But what they were doing, they were just hammering that whole Old West, motif in whole generations of young people. That I call it the John Wayne version of history. It's just pumping out these films for matinees and things like that for kids.
That's
and then you can go take that further back around the time of this, right after the Civil War. It started out with dime novels, dime westerns, and mass production of these books that were cheap that were targeting young boys to read about this Old West. And then that turned into pulp fiction. And then there were dime museums. I'm going to tie this back to Harry Houdini. So the dime museums were, basically freak shows.
Yeah, interesting.
Make it easy to go in, and they were like Ripley's Believe It or Not kind of things. And P.T. Barnum got his start in that. Circuses are another thing. Traveling circuses.
Yeah.
to really debase our consciousness, at looking at these oddities and freak shows. And then with Harry Houdini, a lot of his stunts were above. So direct your attention of the street goers to the above, what's going on up there. Same thing with high wire walkers and, stuntmen that were on top of planes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look up.
Yeah. Draw your attention
Don't look
above. Yeah.
around you.
Yeah.
So that's all part of how we got to television and all this stuff going on. The theme parks have been a big part of it from the beginning.
Uh-huh. I did a video on Luna parks of the turn of the century.
Yeah.
And yeah, all over the place too, all over the realm, not just North America. Yeah.
So we're just going to have a grand old time while they do what they're doing.
Well, they have to keep you distracted. It's like a baby with the rattle.
Right.
They shake the rattle for the baby, and yeah. But this tool, we talked about the internet a few times in this conversation. This tool can be used either for that, or we can actually take control, and we can actually use it to undo that, if that makes sense.
Right.
And
probably like yourself, I know for myself, and I think probably a lot of people, I had no background in any of this when I started. I just had, I got to get this out there.
Yeah.
So, started the blog, and then I was going to make one video, and somebody subscribed, and I thought, well, now I've got to make videos, and got the easiest video making program I could find. And so I could make videos, and they're still not fancy, but that's not what I'm doing it.
They don't have to be, and I think that's the beauty. The beauty of the research, it's the content that draws people in. It's not the flash. It's not the, it's not the glitz bam boom. It's not the visuals so much as or the way it's edited. Even sometimes I worry about that. Maybe I should up my editing game, things like that. But I don't think that's what it's about. I think it's the content.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One more thing, in 1915, we have the first transcontinental telephone call. Thank you, Alexander Graham Bell, for that. The setting of the new communications narrative we're seeing unfold here as well as we trace this down through time. 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, yada, yada, yada. What can you really believe? Oh, Charlie Chaplin. Let's see. 24-year-old first appeared in movie theaters. Charlie Chaplin. In this year, 1914. Also Shackleton, Trans-Antarctic expedition. So again, we have those polar navigations really being pushed in our consciousness. Interesting, I think. And then the Panama Canal gets a bit of a mention. We have a volcanic eruption in Japan. Sakurajima, supposedly most powerful eruption of the 20th century in Japan, 1914. And I know you've done some good research, on what we think of as natural disasters and what are we really looking at with those, because what can you really believe and trust? Is it the shifting of the crust of the orange, or what's going on?
Let's just say with some of those hurricanes, they hit the exact same location more than one time over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
What are the odds?
Yeah.
Or you'll see the hurricane like stalling over somewhere, or you'll see a loopy kind of pattern in the ocean.
Yeah. Or you see a turn on a dime and go 90 degrees in a different direction sometimes.
And then you have a cycle in the lifespan of a hurricane called explosive cyclogenesis.
Oh, I never heard of that.
Look it up.
I'm not going to look it up now. It's too
explosive cyclogenesis.
Okay. I'll check it out on the recording. I'll do some deep research on it. 1913. Let's keep going.
Or eye wall replacement. That's
eye wall
replacement.
Hurricane eye wall replacement.
Yes.
What?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to look it up.
Yes, sir.
Never heard of it. Concentric eye wall cycles, naturally occur in intense tropical cyclones. What? It's like the rebuilding of the eye wall, like the strengthening, the reinforcing of a hurricane eye wall. That's so strange. What?
I think it's a pretty good clue.
Never heard of it. I'm glad we could bring it to the attention of myself and the viewers for sure. Something worth a deeper dive. Wow. A new outer eye wall slowly moves inward and robs the original inner eye wall of its needed moisture and angular momentum. Thievery. Okay. All right. Interesting. I learned this is never heard of this before, so that's interesting. Oh man. Oh, Model T. We're gonna, with the Henry Ford really popping up in the early 19th century or 1900s. Really, like a huge part of the. And we know Henry Ford's history. If you've done any bit of research on Henry Ford, we know that um, not the not the nicest person. I think from if you dig a little bit, doesn't he have supposed racist undertones with a lot of his ties with the Nazis and all that type of stuff?
Wouldn't surprise me.
I think it's all sort of in there. I'll leave it alone for now. I'm sure someone in the comments will throw it in there.
So they had to bring in mass-produced automobiles to replace the electric streetcars that were all over the earth.
Yeah.
Through neighborhoods and everything.
Yeah.
That were, part of the energy grid system and efficient and non-polluting.
Well,
replace them with gasoline-powered vehicles that are polluting, and bring in the insurance and bring in the death from car accidents, and
weren't
they had to do all that.
They're originally meant to be pulled by horses, right?
Right, and that was starting around early 1850s. So I look at it like they got the streetcars up and running with the mules, and then they electrified them sometime around the 1870s, and then they took them out 10, 20, 30, 40 years later. So by the time they got this whole replacement going with the automobile and trucks and so forth, they retired the streetcar systems. In most cases, completely took them out.
Yeah.
Removed the rails and everything, and they left them in a few major cities.
Also,
but they were everywhere.
Erased almost all evidence that they were in a lot of these locations as well.
Right. And then they had streetcars called interurbans, where they would go between cities as well, and they took that system out.
Interesting. I haven't done a lot of research on the interurbans, but that's interesting.
Yeah.
It sounds like a kind of a romantic version of travel. You can imagine hopping on the streetcar, going to the market, and it would have been, yeah.
I tell people I'd like to have a time machine and go back for a day and just see what this civilization was like. I think it was fun. I think it was a fun, harmonious civilization, and nothing like what we've been told. People were in harmony, and people were in harmony and resonance together.
You look at the amount of opera houses and theaters. So obviously, entertainment, the arts, not entertainment, but the arts, I think. More so, like it is entertainment, but it's the arts. It's almost like it had to have been a big part of the old world culture.
And even with cathedrals and other buildings, but let's look at cathedrals. As people weren't going to worship listening to a preacher, they were in there for something else.
Yeah,
because you have organs and bells and the shapes of the cathedral windows, like the rose windows, and certain kind of is actually this form. The rose windows are like solfeggio frequency patterns, and then the more there's windows that are like like the rose windows in the middle. Let's look at that second floor there.
Sure.
And then to either side, the shapes, there's two windows on either side. That's like an antenna. It's like it has to do with sound. And then the organs are typically right up against these windows, like the rosette window.
Yeah.
And so these healing tones were going out, and these buildings were facing each other. So it was like a perfectly in sacred geometry. So it was like a perfectly aligned system. And
Uh-huh.
personally, I believe that Earth is such a big prize because I think all of these frequencies that were being generated for positive purposes were going out. With the organ and the bells and the windows, I think we're sending healing frequencies out not only to the Earth and the Earth grid, but also to the universe, because there's bell towers that just, are
Yeah.
so very high, and they're in alignment with each other too.
Hmm.
So I just think Earth was like Grand Central of the
Really?
universe
That's
and holding it
interesting.
in balance. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little about why they get to have this period of time of control. What's your take on that? As far as a god, you know,
Well,
go
I
ahead.
absolutely believe in source creator. We just didn't happen.
We're not an
and,
accident.
and we're
Came out
not
of
an
the world.
accident. And I think we're much, much, much closer to the creator than what we've been told. Like
Mm,
much.
hmm
And that's
hmm
why we're such a big prize. And Earth is a
hmm
big prize because we have a connection with the creator, that with our soul and our DNA and who we really are and how powerful we really are, that these parasites need that energy.
mm,
And so they put this whole fabricated system in, taught us to think of ourselves as sinful creatures, believing in something outside of ourselves. And believe me, if it's written down, it can be tampered with.
yeah. Yeah.
Even if it wasn't that way to begin with, they didn't start from scratch.
Now you bring that
Um,
up, and I wanted you to mention. Would you get into the Scaliger at all? The whole concept of what that.
okay, I can talk about it. Let me talk a little bit about my timeline research,
Okay.
and then I'll talk
Yeah.
about
Go ahead.
Scaliger. Okay,
Do your thing.
so shortly after I started doing my own research, this thought came into my mind of this time loop between 1492 and 1942,
Hmm.
which is a 450-year period. And then refining it further, the midpoint year is 1717 with 225 years on either side. And if you think of a figure eight, that's kind of how I came on that idea.
Yeah.
And I also tied it to the Earth grids, ley lines, Great Dragon lines.
Yeah.
And then I started researching history from 1492 on up. And around 1717, the midpoint year, there were a lot of anomalies as well, including the founding of the Premier Lodge of London, Freemason Lodge, which was the same year that they adopted the Anno Lucis calendar,
Which
um,
is
which is the Masonic calendar.
okay.
Anno Lucis, Lucha,
Yeah. Yeah.
Lucifer.
Yeah.
And so other things happened around that same time. That was when the Georgian kings, King George the First, that line came in from Hanover and replaced the Stuart line, which is
Mm,
significant. And I've done a lot of
yeah.
research on that as well. So they were replacing the original royal houses of Europe, with this obscure ducal line from Germany, the House of Saxe-Coburg
Of
and
course.
Gotha, which started out as Duke Francis of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, but he was a progenitor of this line. Mayor Amschel Rothschild came in 1744. Adam Weishaupt came in 1748, and Duke Francis came in 1750.
Uh,
And John Rockefeller came in around 1830. So I believe these are souls that are incarnating, and I seriously believe that the Philadelphia experiment went back and created this rip in the fabric of space-time.
Interesting.
And There was something called the Great Frost of Ireland that happened between 1740 and 1741. And I think that experiment caused that to happen. And I have done some intense research on this. I can back it up. I found physical evidence for it.
Yeah.
And I really think that's what happened. And I really have developed some thoughts along that line. I hope you can see the next interview with Chad and Adam, because we really go deep into that.
I'll be all over it. Now, I have actually looked a lot into your timeline theory, and it's a really good backbone for understanding that this could happen here and how it may have transpired. So I think it's really important to share that information.
So between 1492 and 1942, there's 9 50-year periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
And there were major events that were initiated during the 40, 41, and 42, and the 90, 91, 92 in the timeline. So I'm going to call those anchor points of this new timeline.
Yeah.
And again, like I said before, I think at a certain point in time, it's fabricated, and then at a certain point in time, it's history with the controllers written into it.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So that's one aspect of it. Within that period of time, so I mentioned the 50-year time periods, I believe there's 20-year time periods. And I've done the most research in the 19th century. So the 1810, 1830, 1850, 1870, 1890. There's a lot of new activity coming in. So 1810-ish, you've got the War of 1812, you've got the New Madrid earthquake, which has some really shady stories around it.
Yeah.
And 1830, you've got businesses being set up, German immigrants coming over, a lot of German influence during this time, German Jewish influence.
Yeah.
Creation of department stores, livestock butchering, lumber industry. It's an anti-life culture. So they start to package things, cut down trees, kill animals, create jobs where you have to get paid but not well.
Yeah.
Keeping you subservient to the system while they're making tons of money.
Yeah.
1850, you have a lot of new activity coming in, and you have, like I mentioned, the Crystal Palace exposition in 1851. Lots of new stuff going on around that. 1870, you have a lot of stuff. You've got the U.S. Corp.
Yeah, Inc. USA Inc.
In India, you've got. I want to say it was the Criminal Tribes Act that year. Anyway, there's a lot going on in India with the transfer of power from the British East India Company to Queen Victoria. And then there's something called the Criminal Tribes Act, where they oppressed the original ruling families by criminalizing them.
Interesting.
1890, there's a lot of new stuff going on, a lot of building, architectural stuff happening during that time. I mean, you've got it kind of throughout, buildings attributed, whatever, but there's a lot of activity around those years. And so I think it's just part of the way they structured this new timeline that they superimposed over the original civilization to explain how everything came into existence. I absolutely believe that the Freemasons were a big part of this. Buffalo Bill Cody was a Freemason. Lots of Freemasons that come out when you start looking into it.
I have a question as it relates to the hijacking of the royal houses and Haile Selassie, Ethiopia. I know Bob Marley was really big on him, and was that the ending of that old line, do you think, or is that?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one. That was probably the most recent example of the House of Solomon,
which is interesting. Why
Solomonic line.
If you get into Bob Marley's music, it really resonates with what's happened here, on a subconscious or consciousness level. But it's interesting that he was so fascinated with that individual. I felt like I needed to bring it up because it's been in the back of my mind.
Right.
With
And I believe that the House of Stuart was Solomonic also. Probably other houses, the original houses, but for sure. And they stole the legacy. The new royals stole that legacy.
Okay, I know we don't have to go too deep into it, but I have another question. Do you think the House of Stuart is still looking to regain control? We don't have to go too far into it, but
I don't know, but I did see something recently that was quite interesting.
yeah.
That, or maybe you don't know, but I didn't really get into it until I saw a Twitter post, but Donald Trump's mother was from one of the islands, the Scottish Islands.
Sure, yeah. We had a recent coronation. We had that recent coronation.
I'm just gonna leave it there.
Because we're gonna get eaten alive in the comments if we go too far down this road, right?
Right. But I thought that was interesting.
And I would say you and I resonate quite well on that point as well.
But it is a fact that his mother was Scottish, from the Isles. And if you look up the Lord of the Isles, there's again a lot of obfuscation around that. But I think it's very important because one of the titles of the current British monarch is Lord of the Isles.
Oh, the one who was just crowned? Is that who you're talking about?
Back to a certain time in history. So it might have been the Union of the Crowns.
I see.
But the Lord of the Isles.
Okay.
And again, it's you have to read between the lines in everything.
Of course.
But
right, we're standing back and we're getting in a
especially since we're talking about one of the titles of the British monarch now. I think it's interesting to look at.
Well, we could get into the significance of the previous monarch. Well, there's the funeral that happened in September, and I'm sure you know the time distance between her funeral and the coronation of King Charles. 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 days. Come on, guys! It's too obvious. It's too obvious.
Yeah, it's I. They came in through an obscure ducal line and took over all the royal houses of Europe, particularly through Victoria and Albert, who were first cousins. They belonged to the same house of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. They changed the name on July 17th of 1917 to Windsor. So that was during World War I. They said it was because of anti-German sentiment, but also to throw dust in everybody's eyes. Oh, that's not who we are.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's usurpers, right? Usurpers.
Yep.
No question about it.
FRAUDSs.
Yeah. And it's never been more obvious, and they've never been more loathed than now in this period of time by the general public. I think the spell is breaking, and it was a spell, and has been a spell, and it is most certainly breaking, I think.
Yep. And one thing that supports the whole Donald Trump's mother thing is that on a visit to the Queen, he walked in front of her.
Yeah, I remember that. You just don't do that. Yeah, that's interesting. It's really interesting. Also interesting that he was over there when the coronation occurred.
Right.
So there's some strange,
there's something going on there.
Got to read between the lines for sure. Yeah. Another subject I want to touch on with you, if you have a bit of time, that gets into what some people will call Meltology, so I've researched a lot of the catastrophism versus uniformitarianism, and how the uniformitarianism school of thought was pushed on us by the Royal Societies, the Darwins, Sir Charles Lyell, a lot of the old Royal Society types of the late 17 and early to mid 1800s, right into the 1900s. They're trying to obscure evidence of a catastrophe that happened here. How do you feel about that? If you want to get into that, we get too much.
So again, with the internet, I didn't know anything about the mud flood until after I started making videos, doing my own research and blogging. Somebody connected me with somebody that was doing mud flood research.
Uh-huh.
And when I looked at it, it's like we're looking all at the same buildings, all looking at the same buildings.
Uh-huh.
And then that became a pretty central part of what I believe took place. I don't know if it happened all at once. I don't know if it happened, with a few years and
Different
separate
spurts.
incidents. But something happened, and it could have been all at once. And I'm kind of cycling back around to that, but
Yeah.
and I believe the sinking of Atlantis took place much, much more recently than what we've been told.
Yeah.
And so something happened that's being covered up. And if you look at historic pictures of places, just type in mud flood as a search term.
Yeah.
And you'll see buildings being dug out that have a lot more going on underneath the surface. And then they paved the road.
Yeah.
And so you've got a slant in front of the building, and then you've got windows, like a full window up at the top and a partial window down at the bottom.
Yeah. I mean,
so clearly something happened. And I think, when we talk about what the narrative tells us, I'm more inclined to believe that they were, reclaiming everything during the same years that they said they were building it. They were making it usable again. They had to have
sure.
the infrastructure to restart their new civilization.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's difficult to say whether it all happened at once or if there was a series or if it was all yeah, it was a series of cataclysms. So this is very interesting.
But based on my research, I believe there was a civilization that went back to ancient times to relatively modern times.
Uh-huh.
I don't believe in multiple resets over a long period of time, because I do not see how such a beautiful integrated civilization could have come about if there was constantly resets happening. It's all
Continually being
integrated.
destroyed.
It's all integrated. But I do believe in one massive reset. Absolutely
Uh-huh.
massive. They got into everything. They got
Sure.
into
Yeah.
language. They got into religion. They got into everything imaginable.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is when we look at the beauty of the architecture, you need a long time. You need more of a timeline of existence to even so. Our lifetimes, what is 70, 80-year lifetimes? We're told on average. It's not enough time for us to appreciate longevity and to put enough in emphasis into beauty, like the way that a lot of these old buildings are structured.
Right.
You know what I mean? It implies a longer lifespan. I get is what I'm trying to get at.
And they're lined
So
up to the heavens on
yeah,
celestial events, equinoxes and solstices all
yeah,
over the earth.
yeah,
Archways have solar and lunar alignments. Everything's lining up perfectly. You've got like the temple at Angkor Wat with a solstice. I believe it's
yeah,
it's either solstice or equinox alignment, where it just
yeah,
rolls up the side.
yeah.
Glastonbury Tori. It's like it's all over the place. That just didn't happen randomly.
No, and I've seen your work on some of the lighthouses as well, and just the
Mhm.
way that a lot of them line up, and it's really interesting. So
Well,
my theory, if I could share a bit of that with you, because I get into this whole what you might call meltology, or
mhm,
this some of a large part of our realm was much more devastated than other parts,
mhm. Agreed.
right? And then that's how they've distorted our historical timeline to believe that what we're looking at in places like Turkey and in
Mhm.
Egypt are from way further, much further back in time, thousands of years, rather than all being a part of that civilization that once existed here.
Right. Well, you look at some of these. That's a good example. Where it's like built into the
It's not possible
into
to carve
the
that out.
rock.
It's absolutely not possible to carve that out. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I had a thought and that departed.
No worries. I
Oh,
did want
well,
to
I was
broach the
just
subject. Go ahead.
well, you look at the desert areas in the western. North America,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
even on down like on the western coast of South America.
Uh-huh.
So you've got Western Canada, you've got Western United States, where it's just like desert,
Yeah.
on down, and then you've got deserts all over the earth, and the Sahara, and you look at the Sahara on Google Earth, and it looks like a gigantic mudslide,
Yeah.
especially on the western side, Mauritania and that area. So it's like something big happened.
Well,
So
we also have maps, right?
mhm,
Showing the Sahara inhabited, right? Or showing cities
right.
in
So let's say that I've got some ideas now on the sinking of Atlantis that are a little bit more refined.
mm,
Um, but was there some kind of directed energy weapon attack going on either at
mhm.
the same time or a different time? Because it's clear, especially living in Arizona. I mean, I see it all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's the whole subject of giant trees, which has come blaring into my consciousness lately, and I'm seeing that too.
I was thinking of that recently, and like, what if the trees we have now were like a massive a massive burst of seeding and the destruction of maybe giant trees, and you have it
Some
spread across the realm in forests. So, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
something happened, and the
Yeah,
tree story is much more important than
but
what we know.
most of our forests aren't much more than 300-400 years old, as far as we can tell, as well, which syncs nicely with some of this research. You know, and a lot of
Well,
places you want. Go ahead.
you've got some old growth forests in your part of the world, right?
They're on the coast. They're telling us they go up to about 800 years or so, but definitely inland. 400 is an old tree is 200 years old. Really, two to 250 years old is an old tree in the inland regions of Canada. So coastal, for some reason, has a different storyline. So I don't know exactly what to say about that there, but
Hmm.
it's definitely all sorts of things to
There's
consider.
there's patches, like in
Hmm.
California, the
Yeah.
redwoods.
Well, wonder if there was any ability to preserve areas as well. If there was a cataclysm and if it was induced by parasites or.
Potentially. I mean, how do you get rid of a giant tree? So that's like, big question that comes up. But as far as the 1850s again and all the logging that was going on in places like California, um, they got rid of a lot of big trees. So it could have been
Yeah,
a combination of things for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. It's definitely strange goings on, and it's a really fun research to. I always
Mhm.
say this: you never get bored once you open yourself up to this
No,
stuff.
there's
There's no
so
such
much
thing.
information. I can't keep up with it.
No, no, it's not possible. That's why we need each other to sort of to reach out and you know add our
It
ideas.
and there's also the importance of the grid lines, delay lines, and
Yeah.
sacred geometry, because it's all connected to that, and not just on the Earth, but celestial grid lines as well.
Mm, mm,
So
mhm.
so the Earth was completely connected, and who knows now with all the damage that's been done and all the infrastructure that's been destroyed.
Mhm. Yeah. What do you think of ideas like Stonehenge possibly being faked? What do you
You
think
know,
of
I,
that?
I, I don't know. I can tell you that there is a completely intact Stonehenge in Washington State,
Oh, really?
or it's called the Mary Hill Stonehenge.
That's very interesting.
And there's a garbage story that goes along with it, but
Oh, yeah.
it's got alignments with the Milky Way, and search for Mary Hill Stonehenge.
Mary Hill, Stonehenge.
I believe it's on one side or the other of the Columbia River, and Washington State's on one side and Oregon's on the other
Uh,
side.
So strange. I just did a
And if
video
you
on
look at
Portland
pictures,
recently.
yeah, if you look at pictures of this place at night, you know, see the Milky Way overhead and the,
Uh-huh.
the sun coming up. So the story is that this was a war memorial. It was built in 1915.
World War.
One ish, well, somewhere in there by Sam Hill. No
Here we go.
joke.
Dedicated 1918.
1918,
Yeah,
so World War One,
very
somewhere in
high.
there. That's the story.
As you would do. Why wouldn't you make it look like a? And now they're saying built 1918 to 1929. Oh man, replica.
Looks,
It's a
at
replica.
least it took them a while. I mean, sometimes it's like the same year.
Oh yeah, that's huge part of their narrative. Really, it's ridiculous. Yeah, Sam Hill. That's right.
In the wintertime.
Well, it's, yeah, I love working outdoors in the winter. It's fantastic.
Get a lot
Oh
done.
yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting. I've never heard of this place. It is amazing how much there is. How much there is. It's mind blowing. Really.
It's like whoever was writing the narrative said, okay, we'll just put this in here.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what was going on, wars and time of year. Like, no, we're just going to stick this right here. This architect designed it. This company built it.
Yeah, it's really the layers are being peeled back. I just had a good conversation with a friend of mine, Matthew, an architect from Seattle, and we kind of blew the lid off H. Richardson,
Yeah,
the
Henry Hobson
Romanesque styling.
Richardson. One of the geniuses.
Right. It's a silly story. It's I find it offensive. I'm offended. It offends my sensibilities. A lot of
But
what they try to tell us.
you can put Frank Lloyd Wright in the same category, and his mentor. There's like 3 of them that
Sullivan.
are like the triumvirate of, Sullivan, the
Yeah,
triumvirate of architects.
we're going to take a look at them as well. Yeah.
And Frank Lloyd Wright is like such an icon. It's like a
Yeah.
blaspheme.
Yes.
But
Yes. It's like a religion.
he's right up there. Roebling and the Brooklyn
What?
Bridge. John Augustus Roebling.
Yeah, I never heard about Roebling. Huh.
He was the civil engineer that built the Brooklyn Bridge, or behind the Brooklyn Bridge.
Civil engineer, eh? Interesting, because we noticed that the engineers don't seem to get much credit. It seems to always be architects. Engineers and builders are like don't matter as far as the historical narrative goes, but architects get all the glory. All right, I'll share Roebling here too. And then,
John Augustus Roebling. So he was said to have built the Roebling Bridge in Cincinnati, which is clearly old world, and you can find examples of the bridges that look like the Brooklyn Bridge all over the earth too.
He goes way back in the narrative too. 1806, born 1869.
Yeah.
Or Civil War, apparently died in that time period. And then they usually have a projects attribution. This is always fun to go through if they're going to show us. A lot of times they won't show. But.
Well, what's amazing is the detail that they put into these cover stories.
Yeah.
And the same thing with trains and other infrastructure. It's like there's this whole big backstory with all kinds of little teeny tiny details.
Well, there seems to be a real time effort, like in real time, to beef up these backstories. I've noticed it in my searches, even compared to a couple of years ago. You're getting more construction photos than you would have found 2 years ago. Very bad construction photos. Here's one example. Let me just show you. Chateau Frontenac in Quebec City.
Yep.
You're familiar with? Yeah.
Yep.
So I used to search this a couple years ago as I was checking out your stuff and just getting into this field of research. And I would do a search just like I'm doing right now. And what I end up getting is a lot of construction photos. Actually, I'm not seeing them now. Here, actually, it puts Chateau Frontenac construction. I just feel like that there's an active effort going on. Here we go. Right. So they're giving us a lot more
Photoshop.
They're giving us a lot more. So anyone who's new looking into this will say, okay, well, look, I just typed in construction photos and they've got hundreds of them now. It's like, well, that didn't
Right.
exist 2 years ago. Where were they 2 years ago?
Yeah.
You know?
And same thing with World's Fairs, construction
Yeah.
photos of the World's Fairs.
Yeah.
And, now that's been blown up, so people are onto that. And then the St. Louis Arch. I don't think it was built when we're told it was built by any means.
Let's see.
But you've got construction photos out there. So, it just confuses, people that are looking into this that are more inclined to accept the history and, oh, here's proof. But yeah, I mean, there's a perfect alignment with that
Yeah.
building, which I think is an old courthouse, with the arch. And then you find other alignments in St. Louis like that. So
with a New World statue. That was terrible. They couldn't even get any of this right. The proportions are off. That's not Old World, but that is back there.
Yeah.
This is a good visual on, Old World building, brutalist architecture, possibly modified, because they do modify Old World structures and square off the roofs and take away the decoration and call it, that happens a lot.
So another one, I think it's, just look up Quartz building in St. Louis real quick.
Quartz or quartz?
Type in Quartz building and see what comes up.
St. Louis?
Yeah.
Quartz or quartz, like the rock? This one?
Yes. So click on the top left real quick.
Yeah.
Okay. So that building was said to have been modeled after the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, which you find in New York, several building designs. And I want to say that's a Depression era building.
Let's have a look. We'll just
There's also
see
two
what they say.
sphinxes. There's also two sphinxes at the top.
As you do, of course. 1928. Oh, completed 1930. Right in the middle of the crash. Right in the middle of the stock market crash. St. Louis is an amazing city. Amazing.
So you've got plenty of examples of the mausoleum of Halicarnassus running around. Like I said, you've got two sphinxes up at the top, up there, that were attributed to someone else.
I can't believe I haven't seen this. That's amazing. Michelle, I've looked at St. Louis multiple times, and I don't think I've seen this building, which is strange as well. Very strange that I could do a search and not come up with a building like this. A strange aspect of the research as well. I love the columns, the upper columns, right? And of course, wow, this is amazing.
All built during the Depression.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes back to, once you start looking at the narrative, it just falls completely.
It does. It has no legs to stand on. Really, it's relying on the deception and the lack of willingness and care for us to look.
Right.
I think.
And our distractions. So we don't ask questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think maybe we can start to wrap it up. I could put a bow on it. Unless you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground.
We did, and I really wanted to, and I was so excited to have this conversation, and I wanted to I had a list of all these things I wanted to talk to you about, but I hope we can talk again, and maybe you can narrow focus or just chat like this again if you're up for it.
My head is just filled with all of this obscure information.
Yeah.
But I had a good starting point. I had a good grounding when I started. It was like I had the Moorish civilization, I had sacred geometry, I had my data points, I knew what I was looking at, I knew what to look for, and I had a complete framework.
Yeah.
And that's what my very first video I ever made was about, was my framework. Mm-hmm. And I've gone places I never even imagined, and so much deeper than I could have seen when I started.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to be here on the journey, and I want to say thank you for, like I said, the work you've done. It's a major inspiration, and it's a good starting point for people who are just getting into this. is to get into your work. So I encourage people to check out, really dive deep into the work that you've done, and come up with an
Right.
understanding of.
And it just keeps building and building. But I've got a lot of my earlier videos that my work is based on, that don't have the views that I have now, but it was seminal in developing this.
Mm-hmm. Some of the early stuff.
Some of
Okay.
the earlier stuff, and especially the circle alignments, the linear
Yeah.
alignments, because that's how I got here.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. That's worth a look.
There's something to it that's beyond random.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm looking at linear alignments of cities in the United States, and they're all county seats for the most part.
Isn't that
One or
funny?
two exceptions. And I looked at 4 different alignments, and they were all county seats,
Yeah.
with maybe one exception.
Yeah. So yeah, it's
Or
definitely
capitals, or state capitals. They
Yeah,
had
there was.
the Capitol buildings and the big fancy courthouses and that kind of thing. So it's like
It
those
was.
places were made important places.
Yeah, there's much more to it than just random civilization springing out of the mud, isn't there?
Yeah.
Maybe we can next time we can get into the grid and the canals and the
Mhm.
terraforming, if you'd like.
Sure. And also eclipse paths.
Ah, yes, yes. I'll do some research on those areas, and then maybe we can have another conversation sometime later in the summer or whenever you
Yeah.
feel like it.
I have a video
Okay.
called the seven sailor solar eclipse. So the 2017 total eclipse goes in one direction from Salem, Oregon, on down through the country. And
Yeah.
then the 2024 that's coming next year comes from the opposite direction, and they both cross at Carbondale, just south of Carbondale, Illinois.
Really? That's interesting.
Is it beyond random?
Carbondale. I'm gonna put that in, and I'm gonna look up that area. I've never heard of it.
And there's 9 Salems on that one.
Oh, just 9?
Yeah. And there might have
Isn't that
been
funny?
more, but most
Yeah.
of these places, when you go looking at the Salems, there's some places that are still there, but a lot of places aren't there anymore.
Of course, yeah. When and then get into the whole mud flood and what's been erased, and yeah, what isn't there anymore. Hmm. It's interesting. Okay, well, I thank you for joining me here this morning, and I look forward to us doing it again
That would be great. Just send me an email.
anytime. Right on.
All right. Thanks a lot.